I've been asked to do a little bit of work on this BSA A65, which should be a runner soon. One of the jobs that I had to do, the primary drive and everything's been stripped on this previously, because there was a mismatched set of gears in one of the ratios in the gearbox, and that's all been put right. I've done a bit of work on it, and the owner's also done a bit of work on it. The gearbox is fitted and working anyway. But I was told it kicked over and then it suddenly went tight and the kickstart was jamming. In actual fact, what had happened was, it turned out there's a little keyway on the tapered shaft for the clutch, and there's a keyway for the alternator rotor, and the keys look very similar, but one is slightly bigger than the other, and the biggest one is for the clutch hub to go onto the gearbox main shaft, and the slightly smaller one is for the alternator rotor to be keyed onto the crank. What happened, the smaller key had been fitted to hold the clutch in place, and the bigger key had been fitted for the alternator rotor, but the alternator rotor, as it had been slid on, just sort of scooped the key out, flicked it out the way, and it landed on the primary chain. And of course, when the engine's been kicked over, the key got trapped between the chain and the teeth on the clutch basket and made it extremely tight and jammed it up, because when I came to strip this down, I noticed that the primary chain was absolutely bar tight, and I started slackening off the adjuster thinking that it's going to come slack soon, and it didn't. And then I spotted in there this stray Woodruff key that had gone in there, so I pulled all this lot apart and sorted it all out, put the big key back in the clutch and the smaller one in the alternator rotor. Everything's done up tightly and the clutch is working, ready to go. I also attended to the ignition timing, as that needed setting at least to a starting point after being dismantled, because it's electronic ignition, so you can't really do it static as well as you can with points. You set it somewhere near and then hope it'll start, and then finish off with the strobe. So I've done that. I also need to put oil in the engine and the gearbox, but I've run into a problem there as well. I can't get the filler cap off, so I'm going to have to take this seat off out the way in order to get oil in there. So I'll be doing that next, and then hopefully once I've got some oil in there and in the gearbox as well, I might be able to attempt to start this up and gradually knock it into shape, ready to try it out up and down the lane at least. I've got some marks as well there for top dead centre and full advanced timing, so that when I use the strobe I can look for that line there on the rotor. So starting in that region, and as you rev, it should come round to the earlier line there. So I'm going to carry on now. Obviously not going to fit the primary cover or put oil in, because I need to strobe this side, and it's an early type A65 with no removable cover there, so I'm leaving that off. Going to get some oil in the engine and the gearbox. I've got sparks. I think they're happening round about the right sort of time, so fingers crossed it shouldn't be too long before I have this running, and then I can put the strobe on it and fine tune the ignition timing. I've just cleaned out the oil tank on this BSA A65 before I put the fresh oil in. I don't know how much the camera will see, but there's the bottom of the oil tank there, dry and as clean as I could get it. And I managed to do that in situ, rather than go to all the aggravation of trying to get the oil tank off these, because they so nearly come off but not quite, and then you've got to end up taking all sorts of other things off them. You end up having to dismantle half the rear end of the bike, especially in standard form. So I've got it pretty spotless there, just by using various rags pushed through that filter boss there and followed with long flat screwdrivers and pushed in, and so I could sort of scrape and clean along the bottom with the rags, and then put a big long screwdriver in through the filler neck and bear down on the rags and move them around and whatever, I've got it cleaned out. And I like to do that with most of my old bikes with separate oil tanks for the engines, because you've really got to treat this as part of the engine itself, because there was all sorts of filth in there. Some of it I've got here. We look at that. That came out. Nasty. So I know that all that rubbish is out there, because otherwise it all stays in the bottom of the tank there, and then inevitably some of it, if not all of it, will get mixed up with a nice clean oil that you put in there and probably get churned up and sucked through into the engine again. So it's not really very good for the engine at all for that to happen. So this really has to be considered to be part of the engine when you're servicing the oil. The sump plate has been off and cleaned and checked and put back on. So my next job now, I'll reconnect the engine oil pipe. Of course I disconnected that so that I could get the air line and just sort of blow down that oilway there with the air line and make sure that there was no muck in there after my poking rags in and out of there. So that's all clear, and I'll stick the filter cum drain plug back in the tank now, connect that oil pipe up, put the clean oil in there, and know that clean oil and only clean oil will get to the engine and help preserve and hopefully lengthen its life. I'm now at a stage where I'm ready to see if this A65 BSA will run. I've got oil in the engine and the gearbox now, and I think I've got the ignition timing round about where it should be, and most of the little jobs that I needed to do done. There's a few others. When I get it running, I'll obviously put the strobe on it and fine tune the timing if it needs it. But first of all, down there, hopefully, and climb up and see if I can get any life out of this. Fuel on. See what we might get. Well, a jammed kickstart to begin with. Let's see. No. More. Not far off. Right. My next job, I think, will be get the strobe on it, make sure that the ignition timing is right, and then once I know that that's sorted, make any fine adjustments to the carburetors and the tick over screws and so on, and get it running nice and steadily. But that's quite a bit nearer than I was expecting it to be, actually, from just out of the box, set somewhere round about where I would have hoped it would start. So it might not need that much, if any, adjustment on the ignition timing, but I'll set the strobe up next and check that out, and then we'll come back to it and see how it's going. I don't think I'll try and film the strobing because I'm not an octopus and I haven't got enough arms and hands to do a proper job of that. Here we are running, and I've done the best I could with the strobe, but there doesn't seem to be much range for advance and retard on the electronic ignition that's fitted to this. I'm barely getting any movement when I rev it, where the strobe flashes on the rotor. It's not as much movement as I would have expected or liked to have seen, but I've got the full advance timing where it should be, but it doesn't seem to be dropping off quite as retarded as I would have liked it to have done. And the throttle cables or slides are a bit sticky too. Anyway, I suppose the next thing is to get it off the bike lift, see what it goes like up and down the lane, I suppose. Because it is all timed as it should be now, and the carburetors are quite well balanced. We've got a bit of oily residue there, smoking, it's nothing to worry about. I'll let it cool off a little bit and clear the bench. Perhaps consider getting it off the bench and trying it out up and down the lane next. I suppose I can also put the primary cover on now as well.